This is WorkSpan TV. I'm Ryan Johnson from World at Work. Joined today by Doug Friske of Towers Watson. We're going to talk about the need for guiding principles in executive compensation. And Doug, in the setup here, we were just talking, and I really liked what you said about executive compensation sort of going into the funhouse these days, and you look at the mirrors and you're too skinny or you're too fat or you're too tall and you're too short. How do companies navigate these funhouse mirrors?
Well, you're right, Ryan, in terms of this funhouse notion. You think about all the various views that are in the marketplace, whether it's from proxy advisors, from shareholder groups, the media, regulatory view, and any number of other constituents. It is somewhat like a funhouse for companies to try to put their programs, their executive compensation programs, up against those various lenses. You can get very different answers, as you were saying, whether too big, too small, too wide, too narrow, whatever the case may be. And it becomes a real challenge to try to stay the course and articulate what you're trying to do from a compensation standpoint in a way that makes sense for your company. And so what we're seeing in the marketplace today is whether it's confusion, frustration, or just uncertainty in the parts of many companies around, again, how do their programs fit within these lenses? I think there is a real need in the marketplace today for a set of executive compensation guiding principles. Now, if you look back over the course of the last 10, 15 plus years, there are a number of great efforts that have been put forth by different groups around the concept of principles or guidelines or philosophy statements or whatever the case may be, what we want to refer to those. And they've helped advance this notion of principles. The challenge, I think, with many of those has been that they tend to be relatively high level and attempt to have as broad of an application as possible. So it's great to attract, retain, motivate executives. It's great to have pay performance. And we want to avoid entitlements and all, I think, concepts that most of us would agree are important. But the struggle for many companies is how does that actually get put into practice on a day-to-day basis? So in my mind, the notion of coming up with a broader set of principles that aren't too philosophical, but at the same time aren't too prescriptive so that they can be managed to be customized by a company is important.
Yeah, that's the real, I mean, I hate to continue with the circus theme, but that's the real tightrope. I mean, how do you create something that's not simply a checkbox or something that's so broad and philosophical that it's not meaningful? How does one do that?
Well, it is the tightrope that companies are walking, and I think how companies should do that or think about it is starting with the notion almost like GAAP, which are the generally accepted accounting principles for firms with their financial statements, but in this sense, generally accepted executive compensation principles. I'm not a CPA, but I've been around a lot of companies that have dealt with these principles. And as I understand it, the principle is that we want to start, or the idea is start with a set of principles. Start with a set of ideas of what is an appropriate way to, in our world, manage executive compensation. But with a clear understanding that there will be situations where you'll deviate from those generally accepted accounting or executive compensation principles. And so one way that I've thought about it is, could we have a set of principles where the majority of time we would expect this to be the outcome? Think about it in any number of ways. Our mix of long-term incentives, how we set executive compensation levels, how we benchmark executive compensation, the role of certain measures in an incentive plan. All else equal, could we come up with a set of principles that would say the majority of time, not all the time, we'd expect certain outcomes or certain practices in each of those areas. And then to the extent that your organization needs to vary from those, you just would talk about why that's the case. Why would you go non-GAAP? Why would you want to deviate from those principles? So it is a tightrope, needle that we're trying to thread. But I think there's something there that if we can get to this, as I said, this majority, this common practice, and then have a reasoned discussion around why you differentiate, I think we'd be in a better place.
Now, you've invoked GAAP a few times. Does this need to be done by a quasi-governmental agency, or can this be done organically in some other way?
My hope and expectation that it could be done organically. There's been enough of a body of experience among practitioners that we could get to the place of having an organic development. I would hope we wouldn't need to have a government or some third-party involvement. But if we were to that point where, whether it's an organization like World at Work or some other organization that was involved in this, I think that would be fine. What I would want to avoid, though, as I said, this kind of, back to the prescription concept that I used earlier, the concept where it was just kind of handed down to companies. I think it does need to be more organic, as you said, and just an application of good common sense principles.
Doug, it's really difficult to disagree with this notion that we need some guiding principles around executive awards. So where do you think we go from here?
Well, we at Towers Watson, in fact, have been giving a lot of thought to this because obviously all the different voices that have been in the marketplace the last few years. And so over the course of the last year, we've convened a group of our senior practitioners to think about this notion of principles and what might be a good starting point for companies. And so we're in the process of wrapping up that work, and we anticipate over the course of the next several months and into calendar 2013, we'll be rolling those out. And I'm sure they'll spark a significant amount of dialogue and debate and discourse, which I think is healthy to get us to the point of coming up with an organic kind of set of principles that can help companies get out of the funhouse and have a mirror they can look in and reflect their programs with and be proud of them.
And I know that World at Work, as the association for the executive compensation professional, and the compensation professional will be following it as Towers Watson moves forward. So I want to thank Doug Friske from Towers Watson. For WorkSpan TV and World at Work, I'm Ryan Johnson.